All right, JPB's got a question.
This is for Brian. So you were talking about, having somebody come in from another territory into your territory. My question is this. In New York right now, we have one person who is coming in from another territory into our territory, someone I have a great deal of respect for. We also have somebody who was on the team who wants to come back to the team. So the question then becomes, how do I properly, while also doing justice to the people who have been either team members or candidates on various tiers, integrate these people into the team and do right by everybody?
I think that's a great question, and I think that's a very realistic situation. It all comes down to who are the influencers and trying to manage expectations. So those are the two big key things. Who are the influencers and how do you manage expectations? You have to think anytime someone is coming in from another area, this involves your team. How do they feel about a Curtis J. Hughes? And just since I referenced him before, Curtis coming in to work an event with us at the State Fair, how does my team respond to that? How does my division manager? How does Curtis's division manager? How does Curtis's DM? He's in a pilot office, but you need to go through those steps. And if it's cross-region, then that's just a whole different thing, but you need to be respectful of all those different perspectives. And so I think you just need to start from a perspective of trying to say, what are the different, people who matter in this equation? I think you need to be able to explain to your team why someone has the opportunity they do. And don't get me wrong, just because we treat people evenly doesn't mean people haven't earned the right to have different consideration. Like, that's a whole different ballgame. Being even doesn't mean that your new guys get to have entitlement over a CSP either. You'll follow me on that? Like, it cuts both ways. So I have no problem going to my guys and saying, hey, look, we would love to get you in there, and I'm really excited to get you there in a year or two once you have done XXX. But in the meantime, we have this person that's willing to contribute back, to give to the community, to get a chance to come in a very positive way, and we're really excited to do that. But I wanted to talk to you first and let you know this is happening so you're not surprised, and talk about how excited I am to have you in that role here in the near future. So that's the thing. It's just manage expectations and make sure you're staying in front of who the big influencers are.
Follow-up question to that is, how far in advance is like that thought process and that communication process taking place in those situations?
Yeah, where it gets bad is when it happens like too late or even after the fact. There's no such thing as getting in front of it too soon. It's always a win. We had Will Heffernan very generously helped us with a show. This was probably a year or two ago, and he had come in and helped with a show we could not staff. And so I reached out to his division manager. This was probably about 3 months beforehand, and just said, "Hey, we're bringing him in. These are our policies. Here's normally what we would ask for. Can you be in alignment with that? Are you okay?" Knowing that I may have to compromise because we were in the point of need. But again, and literally the division manager, he just said, "Hey, I really appreciate the way that you came at this." I mean, that was just his sentence. He just said, "I appreciate the way you came at this. Of course, I'm happy to do that. I'm glad he had the opportunity, but thank you for checking in with me." So I think as soon as you possibly can, guys, division managers and top-level DMs are running successful businesses. They plan things out months in advance. You can't have the conversation too soon.
Cool. Any other questions for anybody else on the panels? Yeah.
Our training is similar. Actually, we've strived to kind of do what Lone Star does. That's kind of what we've been working on implementing. So, throughout the year, we're trying to follow the same kinds of things because Pato's awesome at this. But I would just say, just kind of a note, following up with what Ian said too, is, we don't want everybody to make it through. That's kind of part of it. There's kind of a weeding out process, because we don't need a fair and show team of 200 kids. We need people who are really serious, who are excited to be there, and who are going to add value. Fonz said specifically, it's not just, why do you want to be here? But it's like, what are you going to add to our team? We're not just here to give you shows. What are you going to add and contribute to our team, and how are you going to help us grow? That's what we're asking from people. And having too many people just kind of coming in willy-nilly, whatever, off the cuffs, here, work a show, not really clear on policies, not really knowing their scripts, just kind of hanging out. It's very draining on the coordinators too, having to deal with all of that. And those people can really influence your culture in a negative way. And something that we are really serious about in Texoma is like our culture, and we're very protective of it. And we only want to work with the best people. And so if you can't cut it and you can't make it through a simple training process that's spread out over a couple months, then this isn't the job for you. Right?
Question for Brian is shift averages. So what are the minimum standards for shift averages? That's the first part of the question. And then for all of you, do you have similar standards, and also how do you track those standards?
That's a great question. The simple answer is this. We track shows on 4 different levels. We have marketplace events, traditional events, key events, and state fairs. And we track stats independently for these different levels because I don't want to disincentivize a top CSP from working a marketplace event because it might reflect poorly on their overall averages. Y'all follow me on that? And so the simple answer is this. What are our standards? I can tell you standards, but I don't think they matter because I think it has more to do with where is your team currently at and then what's your plan to help that grow. So I think you need to figure out what is your team's overall average, and then you compare that to people's individual average. That's the way to let it scale in a healthy way instead of arbitrarily taking a number from some other division. Now, I will throw one other quick note out. I talked to Dave about this yesterday, and I told him that I love, like, the analytics stuff is unbelievable. But for me as a coordinator, a very useful thing would be able to have the ability to tag shows. So that way I could tag every show as marketplace, traditional, key event. And he said he loved the idea. He said that they've already sent it to the programmers, and I don't know when, but at some point in the future, we will have that ability. So that way it'll be much easier than to run a report, just sort it based off category of event, and then you pull the averages, boom. So again, Dave Bush comes through again.
Cool. All right, Jonathan.
On a personal note, I want to give a very special shout out to both Brian and Jason. Jason is my mentor for 2 years, and Brian is a dear friend. Our team jumped by 50% this past year. We're looking to grow by 50% again, and literally it was almost copy and paste from implementation of things that you pioneered, so thank you very deeply to the both of you. My question is more for Brian and Jason, but I'm open to anyone. Brian, you mentioned especially with the state fairs, I've had the privilege of being invited in a couple times for events that you guys have. At what point do you make the decision that, hey, this is an event that we really need to bring a guest in for? Is it has to do with shift average? Is it something to do with performance of the event overall? And also, how did that initial conversation go to your team with explaining, hey, we have people to staff, but we're going to let someone else come in and do that?
It's a great question. We kind of already hit that. We always refer back to the policies. Like, again, I'm a policy wonk, and so it's very simple. If we have a traditional event and we do not have the sufficient number of people that are eligible to work traditional events who can work it, we'll bring a guest in. We have brought Dante in. We've brought Frank. We have brought Justin Ledford, and not just for state fairs. Like, if we have a traditional event and we can't staff it appropriately, we will always go to guests first, and this is with our DVM's approval. This is a thing, before we will lower our standards to simply staff the event, even though some of the lower people on our team are excited by that. But because they know no exceptions are made, there's no use crying and moaning about it. Just get your averages up.
Yeah, the standards are there for a reason, and so it makes 100%, sense to not lower them and have people go lose money or, not get the results that you could have for your team. And bringing people in is just super powerful as well from what I've seen from what you guys have done. It's like their averages are just, skyrocketing. And so when we bring people in, usually it's because of a staffing issue, because we're not going to lower our standards and have someone work like a $400 shift when they're not ready.
The only thing I'll add to that, because I do help with the state fair process, is I would just say the bigger and more valuable the event is, the further in advance you need to be thinking those things through and your staffing and all that sort of stuff. So state fair specifically, we're answering the questions about our staff, who's going to qualify. Like we're really having those strategy sessions. We're starting them in 2 weeks. So we'll start having those conversations, and we'll have the answer on how many guests do we believe we need, what's our shift inventory going to be, and all that sort of stuff before the spring campaign's over. So even though our event doesn't happen until September, October. So we've actually involved our team for the state fairs in voting who they want to invite in. Like, it's not like Brian and I are just sitting in there going, we let them nominate, and then, so we're not just sitting in a corner one place going, let's invite in, Jason, like, you know what I mean? We're just making that decision because it's what we want. We let them nominate people, and then we decide from there who we want to bring in, after also speaking with the DVMs and looping them into that conversation, that decision-making process. So we got time for like one, maybe two more. All right, we're going to go to Mr. Southard in the back here.
Does it ever... So there's definitely the business side of things, but is there any, has anybody tapped into the personality side of getting these two people to work together at this particular show is a better outcome than not, or just kind of random and whatever they think, whatever the team thinks?
Yeah, I would just say for us, short answer is no, we don't. But it doesn't mean we don't notice those trends. When we thought about introducing it, it just adds too many variables for us to manage. So when we have noticed it, the things that we have done, number one is we encourage people to really proactively pick shifts when they're doing it based on the people they're the most excited to work with. Number two, we have conversations with people when we see that like their averages are lower about saying, hey, and it's not about why do you sell less when you work with Brian, but it's more about like, hey, how do you feel you're able to create energy in the booth? Like, how do you feel like you're more susceptible to who you're working with? And you kind of, you just sort of posit it without the data and sort of let them kind of show where they're at, and maybe it's an opportunity for growth. But the best version of the conversation I've ever had is this. I had one person in particular that there was some challenges, and so I showed them where there was one person on the team that worked with them always sold more. And I just asked them, I said, man, what do you think you do? Because this person always performs better than when they're with you. How do you think you do with that? And they just shared some stuff, and I'd like to think maybe that helped them double down. But then they asked a very powerful question was, well, what does it look like when other people work with me? And I was like, I mean, I can show you if you want. And I just used data to let the story tell itself. So that was the best version of the conversation I've ever had. 9 times out of 10, though, you just challenge people to sort of continue their path of growth so they're less susceptible to the influences of people that might drag them down.
I want you guys to write something down really quick, just as a lesson from listening to these guys right now. Something that they all have in common in what they're sharing about having these conversations. Write this down. Positively framed, generative questions. Positively framed, generative questions. If you want to become a massive influencer with your people, stop focusing on the negative and the issues and like what they're doing wrong, and ask yourself, if I'm going to have this conversation, how can I frame it in the positive? And what's the question I can ask that will help them generate a productive answer towards moving forward in the way we want? Okay? Think about that. Just let that sink in for a second. Positively framed, generative questions. If I'm going to have this conversation with someone, how can I frame it to the positive? Like Brian said, I didn't talk about the 80 people they're working with that they suck with. I talked about the one person they work with that they do great with. Positive, right? And then he asked a question that empowered them to generate an answer that would let them move forward, that would open the door. And then they had their own process of self-discovery of all the crap they've been causing in their wake. But ask yourself that question, right? Anytime you're getting ready to have one of those conversations, Jason just shared, like, hey, we have this conversation, we do it in this way, and it was all positively framed, and they were all questions that empowered his team to generate their own answers. But because it's positively framed, it's forward focus, right? It's going to focus them towards growth, and you can facilitate the process of them having them discovering the answers that you want them to discover, like Nick was talking about, right? And Robert, these guys have all given you tons of examples of positively framed generative questions. If you go back and watch this video in a couple months once it's posted, I would encourage and challenge you to look and write down every question they asked and ask yourself, like, temper it. Is this positively framed? And is the answer to this question going to be generative towards a positive future or progressive future? And what you're going to find, what I noticed, is that every one of those questions you'll be able to check that box. You'll be able to check both those boxes. And that's the secret, right? When you get people focusing on what's great and you get them focusing on how they can do even better moving forward, and you're facilitating the process of helping them discover their answers, you become a better influencer. Because you're not just speaking at people, you're talking with people, and you're facilitating their growth. And that's where you really become the best coordinator, best leader that you can be for people. Think about it. With your DVMs, same thing. With your new reps, with your district managers, everybody that's involved in your organization, if you use that approach, it'll change a lot of stuff for you. So let's give these guys a big round of applause. Huge.